Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to see you all have joined us this afternoon. This is the first of this series, this professional development series, sponsored by Title III and Florida A&M University. And we are here to learn about how to achieve financial peace. We have a great presenter for you today. And just as a heads up, and many of you may already know this, but next Monday, at the same time, the same Zoom channel, if you will, we'll have a panel discussion called Get It Right. And the focus there will be on having the correct mindset as we move forward with your writing, your research, and your dissertation. And then the Monday after that, on the 11th of April, we will be discussing going from grad school to work. And there we'll be looking at some of the best practices for finding your dream job with your PhD. And so without further ado, I'm going to bring or introduce you to Dr. Desmond Stevens. He is the Director for Faculty Development at Florida A&M, previously a professor of math in the College of Science and Technology there. I guess, Dr. Stevens, you're still a professor of math.
Still a professor of math, yep.
I want to remove that from you. But one of the most interesting things that is in Dr. Stevens' repertoire is his knowledge about financial management and planning. And he has been, I don't know how many of you all are familiar with Dave Ramsey, who has a well-known radio talk show. And he also presents information on financial planning across the nation through Financial Peace University coordinators. And Dr. Stevens was such a coordinator with myself many years ago. And so he's taught this type of material to lots of different people. And so hopefully you guys will get a lot of good information from this. And we will, of course, be opening the floor for questions. Dr. Stevens, do you want to hold questions, or can people ask questions as we move along?
Oh, yeah, they can jump in whenever they like. Yeah.
Excellent. So if I don't notice you, please raise your hand or put something in the chat. If you don't feel like turning on your cameras and you would prefer to just put your question in the chat, that's fine, and I will get to them that way. If you want to just go ahead and say, excuse me, and ask something, that's don't want to be too formal here. So Dr. Stevens, you take it away.
All righty. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Thumbs up or something, you can yell out. Okay, good. So as Dr. Moore said, first of all, thank you for having me. I am Desmond Stevens. I am Director for Faculty Development, math professor. And as he mentioned, I've been tinkering with Dave Ramsey probably since, I think I got a book from Dave Ramsey about 1999. So my hope is that today, I can open your eyes to some things that you might be able to do, particularly at the places that you all are in your careers. Everybody's in graduate school, and that you'll be prepared, well positioned to achieve all of your financial goals because you're starting so early. And many of us, Dr. Moore and I both would have loved to have known the things that we know now when we were your age and your position, because we would have done lots of things differently. So before we get started, I do want to let you know about some things that I am not, okay? So I'm not a life coach. I'm not a financial advisor. I don't help people pick stocks because I don't know anything about that. And I'm really not an expert. So everything that we're going to talk about today are kind of things that you would think of as common sense, right? I don't know anything about crypto. I don't know anything about what are those things, Dr. Moore, blockchains and all those other, I have no idea what those things are. I'm not selling you anything. At the end of this wonderful presentation, I'm not going to say if you just send me $59.99, then I'm going to hook you up, because I'm not selling any products. I'm not pushing get rich quick schemes because I don't want to go to jail. I'm just a regular dude. And that happens to be my beautiful wife, Dr. Sonia Stevens. She said she was going to jump in. So if she jumps in, we'll have her turn on her camera and make sure she actually is the same woman that I have here in this picture. All right. The truth is that you all are almost done. I don't know where you are in your graduate careers. You might have just started. You might be finishing a master's. You might be working on your dissertation. But in the grand scheme of things, you're going to be finished very soon. But you all have, and I'm saying, I'm going to go with all luck, Dr. Moore. There might be some non-traditional students in here, but I'm assuming that most of you all are very young, probably somewhere in your mid to late 20s, if you're like the rest of us who are working on these types of degrees. So you're very, very young. And so the question is, what do you want to do? Do you want to be a millionaire? And that's just a euphemism for, do you want to have the type of financial security that I think most people want who are doing the things that you are doing? Of course, we have more altruistic ideas about what we want to do, want to make changes in the world, but we're doing this partially because we want to have some peace. And if you're very young, you probably don't want to think about now in your mid-20s working until you're 75 or 80 years old, right? So you have a couple of things on your side. The biggest thing you have on your side, you got a ton of time. So I'm going to talk to you today about things you can do very slow and consistently, and you'll be amazed at how you can change your lives as you get to be, my age, in your mid-50s. And the other thing you have on your side is that you're at the beginning of your career. So whatever you're getting paid now, which is probably not much around it. I think that when I was a grad student, my stipend was $12,500. That was in the early 90s. Could barely pay rent and eat. And you all are probably, I'm assuming everybody in here is, these are great students. And, so typically probably somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 would be, a typical stipend for a graduate student now. So you're making a very small amount of money, relatively speaking, but you're going to get your degrees and then instantly your income is going to jump. And so the real benefit you have is that you are, and we'll say this in a nice way, you don't have any money now, right? And then you're going to get a job in a year or two or three or four, and it's going to jump. And here's how it's going to jump, right? The median earnings for doctoral, folks who have doctoral degrees is around $100,000 a year. Professional degrees around 100,000 as well. Master's degrees around 80. And even if some of you all decide you're just not going to finish your master's degree and you quit now, medium salaries for people with bachelor's degrees is around $70,000 a year. I just read a recent article in the Wall Street Journal that indicated for many of the people who are in areas that are high demand areas such as yourselves, that they're offering students with bachelor's degrees $100,000 a year, so 6 figures, and a bunch of perks with that. So the expectation that you're probably going to make a lot more than this, if not as soon as you get your first job, very soon after you start. And so as we're going through the presentation, you might start thinking about what kinds of things could you do if the income that you had tripled, literally, right? So if someone said to you, for example, you might want to make sure that for the next 20 years, you save $1,000 a month to invest in a retirement account. Right now, that might seem daunting, but if I tripled your salary, that would probably be quite easy to do. And you probably could do even more than that. The other thing that I always talk to people about when I'm talking about this is think about if you got this $100,000 a year salary and you got that $100,000 on January 1st of that year. So they gave it all to you at one time. What kinds of things would you be thinking about doing if you had that huge lump sum of money all at once versus if it was given to you in bits and pieces where you might nickel and dime it away, right? So you might claim to me you're making $100,000 a year. You might do some things with that money or obligate it in such ways that halfway through the year, you'd be telling me, I'm not making a lot of money. I can't really make it. I live in New York, Chicago, LA, wherever it is. And I'm really not going to be able to get myself together until I start making more money. So you can imagine that there are big things that you probably would want to do if you had $100,000 that you would do because that would be a big priority. And you would see that I could spend $30,000 on something that you might not think if you had to save the $30,000 throughout the year that you could do. So you just want to start thinking about what would I do if I had the big lump sums of money, because that's what you can do with your salary. So that's what we want to have in the forefront of our mind. So I'm going to give you advice for people who don't want to be normal. And that might sound strange to you, but I'm going to go through some of the things that are normal. And before I do that, I don't have a poll, but maybe you can just indicate with thumbs up if you're comfortable. How many of you all have some student loan debt? And let's put a number on. Let's say you have more than $5,000 in student loan debt. If you do, thumbs up if you feel comfortable. All right, so I see a few people throwing thumbs up. Okay. How many of you have some sort of car payment on a used or new vehicle? I got a few gigs. Yeah, a few people throwing the thumbs up. Okay. All right. And then last question I ask you is, how many of you have some sort of revolving credit card debt? So not a credit. If you have a credit card and you're paying it off at the end of the month, you don't need to put your thumbs up. But if you have a credit card that you run a balance on of any amount from month to month, throw your thumbs up. All right, and I see a few people, and some people may not be comfortable. You know, that I was talking to my father about this. He's in his mid 70s, and his next door neighbor sold his house, and he asked him everything about the sale of his house except how much he sold it for. And I said, hey, Dad, that would have been the first question I asked, but I understand in some circles, we don't like to talk too much about our finance, and that's okay. So what is normal? Well, Americans hold about $807 billion in credit card debt. And that's significant because credit card debt is probably the most costly debt that any individual could hold. You all are probably aware that, you know, mortgage loans now, the debt on mortgages is way down in terms of the percentage rates, historically low. Even car loans are historically low, but credit cards still are much higher than those loans are. So that's probably the highest cost debt that anyone can hold. But there's $807 billion out there. I think when I pull this information, that's about on average $5,600 per person who is eligible for credit. 45% of Americans make minimum monthly payments. So if you combine the fact that this is the most costly debt that someone can carry with the fact that they're actually carrying that debt for long periods of time, you can imagine they're spending a lot of money just servicing their debt. And that's money that could be spent on something else if they didn't have that. Only 32% of Americans can cover a $5,000 emergency with cash. So Americans typically don't have a lot of cash stacked away to take care of emergencies. And I know that prior to 2005, 2006, I felt like I was able to cover emergencies because I had several credit cards in my wallet for which there were large limits. And I figured, hey, I have about $30,000 of instant credit. Something bad happens, I can swipe a card and I'm in good shape. But I didn't have any cash. Literally, I had almost no cash. You know, I don't think that at that time I ever had $5,000 in a savings account. I just thought about the financing differently. 49% of Americans cannot cover 1 month of expenses if they miss a paycheck, right? And so you can imagine that when things like pandemics hit or job markets change, that this has a significant impact on people's abilities to just subsist if they can't cover not even 1 month of expenses before they're in trouble. Hence, when 2008 hit and there was a housing bubble, people were having a whole bunch of trouble because they were unable to pay for their normal expenses, and then their homes, different things happening with their mortgages, the price of their mortgage has gone up, and then people are in the street. The average public university student debt is about $30,000. And this is consistent with my own experience. I had at least that much. And by the time I got done with graduate school, it was probably even a little bit more. So for people in your position, students who are finishing, you know, their graduate programs or professional programs, probably their largest debt is going to be student loan debt if they're just typical. Note that we mentioned here public universities because you all have all made a wonderful choice. And the first wonderful choice you made is that you're attending a public institution because the costs for you are significantly less than if you had gone to a private institution. Yet the quality of education is, for all intents and purposes, the same, if not better, depending on your choice, you know, your choice of major. We all love our large SUVs and the biggest houses, apartments, condos that we can afford. And that's even as graduate students. If you have $600 for rent this year and you find a way to get $800 for rent next year, you're going to move to a nicer and bigger apartment, or you're going to kick all the roommates out, or you're going to do something. And part of that is this feeling that we have, you know, when you get to be Dr. Moore and myself, that we, you know, we deserve a nice vacation or other things. And for you all, it is that you have made a very recent in your mind commitment to your education and to being poor to get your education. And so the tendency is to get the first job, buy a nice car, buy a nice condo or house and, take some vacations, make sure your clothes are right, shoe game is tight, all those other things that you've kind of been putting off because you've been trying to make it through grad school. Here's a place where, when I looked at my finances, spent an incredible amount of money eating out. And on average, Americans spend about $3,000 a year eating out. And while they're spending $3,000 a year on average eating out, and if you actually just keep track, I was doing it this morning, let's see, as a math guy, if you at that Starbucks, Dr. Moore, is the Starbucks still down in the bottom of the Mag Lab and also in the E building, right? So if you spent $5 in Starbucks 5 times a week, that's $25 a week that you're spending on Starbucks. You multiply that by 52 and you know what that number looks like, right? I think it's over $1,000, right? And that's just on Starbucks coffee. You didn't eat at McDonald's, you didn't hang out with your friends, you didn't do anything on the weekend, you just got coffee in the morning when you got to the E-School. So the question is, how do millionaires roll, right? Maybe they're doing the same stuff we're doing, they just have a lot of money, so it's cool, right? Well, there's a great book that was written back around 2010 or 11, and it was written by Dr. Thomas Stanley, who was a business professor at UGA. And I think that I just looked it up again. I think he literally died before the book was published. So it was Dr. Danko who actually kind of finished the book up. And so some of the information a bit dated, but the ideas behind it are the same as I looked up some data. And what you'll find out is that, first of all, the giveaway is that it's the millionaire next door, not in the gated community that we can't get in because they live in so high and fly, right? So how do they live? Do normal millionaires live in the first house or the second house? Like, they living like that or they living like that? It's not a trick question. Everybody should get this because it's the millionaire next door. So I don't know if you have a house or your parents have a house. For most of us, your parents' houses look like that, or they're looking more like that, right? My parents looking more like this and like this. So this is what millionaires live in, right? It's counterintuitive because you think that what a millionaire would be doing is showing you all the time how much money they have. But as we go through this, what you might figure out is that the reason why millionaires have $1 million is because they're not ever trying to show any people how much money they have. They're trying to just make sure they're stacking the paper, right? Get in the bag, right? That's the whole idea. Literally, the research shows that millionaires drive, oddly enough, pickup trucks. And at 2010, it was Ford Taurus, right? They don't make the Taurus anymore. But now it's more like a used Camry, Honda, right? Something that's very reliable, cost effective, and they can drive forever. So people who have a lot of money are thinking about purchasing vehicles and driving them until literally the wheels fall off, right? They're not thinking about purchasing a vehicle that people can see and say, wow, that person's got a lot of money. So as Dr. Moore mentioned, I got in contact with this guy, Dave Ramsey, through listening to his radio show. And in 1999, a good friend of mine gave me his first book. And I think the first one was A Total Money Makeover. And then I ended up getting Financial Peace later on. And I had that book probably for 2 years and I never opened it. And I opened it and read it. And the first thing that jumped out at me, and we'll go through some of these steps. And I put up Dave Ramsey in his book as I was thinking about this. It's for attribution, not advertisement, right? So you don't have to buy any of his stuff. It's just I'm using a lot of his information. I don't want him to sue me later and say I kind of took his program and did my own presentation with it. But what hit me about it was I started to think, wow, this is all stuff that I could literally do. Like broke me, going to work every day. I could do this stuff. And when I started to do it, I started to see a change, and it didn't really make much difference except a paradigm shift in the way I thought about finances. And so very recently, Ramsey Solutions, which is Dave Ramsey's company, did a survey of 10,000 millionaires. And I thought I would present this to you because it's a little bit more updated. They recently did this study in the past year or so. And so 79% of the millionaires did not receive any inheritance. So contrary to belief, millionaires aren't millionaires because they had rich families who gave them money. Millionaires are millionaires because they kind of figure out something that people want and they do that thing and they kind of grind at it and they amass $1 million+ 80% of millionaires are college graduates. Well, you all are there, right? So you got the first thing taken care of. 75% of the millionaires invest regularly in their retirement plans. You all don't know, would not imagine how many of my peers that I know talk to me about not being able to invest properly in their retirement. And I just ran it just for kicks. If you invested for 30 years, assuming that your salary was $75,000 a year for the entire 30 years, and you invested to 15%, which I ran as about $935 a month, that in 30 years, you'd have over $2.3 million as long as you had a reasonable 8% investment. So regular people can actually get to big numbers. And if you're 30 years makes you 60. You're 60, you got $2.3 million. Why are you working? You're doing whatever you want to do. You're traveling, playing golf, hanging out with grandkids at that point, but you're not going to work every day. And you're certainly not going to work every day putting up with anybody's nonsense. So the first time you go to work when you're over 60, you got $2.3 million, somebody gets on your nerves, you're like, I'm out, done, right? So that's, and that's assuming you never make any more money. Like I don't assume you guys are gonna get your first job, get 75 grand, and that's all you're gonna get. You're gonna get raises, right? That's just being able to put away $935 a month. By the way, in this last slide, I didn't mention, I didn't make a slide for it, but the 75% are putting 15% in their 401k, 403b, whatever their retirement plans are, and they're investing additional money in separate investments. So they're investing literally around 20% of their money. So and this is the slide here, millionaires invest about 20%. So, and you can imagine if you found a way to put $935 away, you're making 75,000. If you doubled that, you were in your 40s and you were making 150,000, you would certainly be investing more money, and that just makes you richer. In this survey, they found that the top 5 careers for millionaires, well, a bunch of y'all are in here, you're engineers, right? So you picked the right one. Accountants, particularly CPAs. Oddly enough, teachers, right? So we have this perception that teachers are poor, and they are. So it's actually, I was listening to him talk about these results, and he was making some conjectures about why teachers who were significantly underpaid were able to amass $1 million. And he says it's probably because they think about finances differently because they're teachers, right? So their common sense quotient is probably very high in terms of saving and investing and living within their means, so that the salaries don't matter. It's a different discussion about whether or not, a 6th grade teacher should only be making $40,000. They probably should make more because they're very important to us, but they're able to do it. Then managers, which you can imagine. And then attorneys were 5th and 6th were doctors. So as you all get into the professoriate and you start talking to students about choices, you're going to find, as particularly me in the College of Science and Technology, where we have biology and chemistry, that most of the students who come to us as freshmen are all thinking about the medical field, which costs a lot to become a doctor. And they're not even in the top 5, right?
Wow. Dr.
Yeah.
Stevens, can I ask you,
Sure.
are you saying that these careers here, are they in order, or are they just the top 5?
They're in order.
Oh, okay.
They're in order for the 5. So engineering, CPA, teachers, management, and attorneys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And attorneys is another misconception. They made it to the top 5, but return on investment for attorneys and doctors are often not really very good. Significant amounts of money are spent to become attorneys and doctors. And in general, they don't make Johnny Cochran money. They don't make Ben Crump money, right? Or any of the other attorneys that we can think of. They don't make Grey's Anatomy money, that kind of thing. The median salary for millionaires is about $100,000 a year. So I think at the writing of the book was around 131,000. And then when the cursory research I did around the internet, it was about $100,000 still. The median salary for all Americans is about 65,000. Right. And that's according to 2020 census data.
I'm sorry, but that we have to pause right there.
Yeah, stop right there. Think on that. I'm taking
up all the time. I actually got flummoxed on the slide before this one. So
that one?
Yeah. So millionaires are not, first of all, I think most people know that definition is not that you make $1 million a year.
Right. It's $1 million.
Not only that,
Yeah.
You are the average millionaire is really only making about 100 grand a year.
Yep.
That's just amazing to me.
It's amazing. It's a mindset, right? To amass that. And I thank you for bringing it up, Dr. Moore, that when we talk about millionaire having $2 million, we're talking about in terms of assets, right? So you take all the things that are value, subtract away all the things that aren't, and then what's left. So people are getting to this by, having good investments in property, having 401k, and probably the reason why you see their lifestyles being the way they are is that most who reach this point have money in vehicles that they're not actually able to put their hands on. Hence, they're able to amass the money, right? So if you have money in 401k, there are big penalties if you take it out before retirement age. So even for people who are not financially savvy, that's usually the last place that they would go to take money out. And that's where millionaires have their money in their homes, equity in their homes, those types of things. As we talk about this, the idea of getting equity in your home requires that you have significant down payments and that you don't borrow against it, right? But even if you have a modest home, as it gets to be paid off, you may have $100,000 or $200,000 in asset in that vehicle.
Right away. Okay.
Yeah. So I'll talk to you a little bit about 5 pillars of strong financial foundation, right? So the first is to budget. I was talking to my father. I went to go visit him during spring break, and he was talking about, like most of us, you could stand to lose a pound or two. He was talking about, hey, I started journaling what I was eating. So every time he ate something, he'd write it down. He said he got about halfway through the week and he stopped. Can anybody tell me why a guy who looks like me, could lose a few pounds, might start writing down everything they ate on Monday, and by Wednesday, I throw my hands up and say, I'm not writing it down anymore? Somebody just chime in and tell me why Dr. Stevens might not want to journal what he eats 3 days into his journaling eating plan. Don't be shy. You won't hurt my feelings.
Can you please repeat that question?
Yeah, let's say that I started writing down. I like to eat. I'm a little heavier than I should be, and I decided that today I was going to start writing down everything I ate. And by Wednesday, I stopped writing it down. I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. What do you think might have happened to me?
Because you probably figured out that.
I hear. Was that Christina? Scream it, Christina.
Yes. You probably can't. You probably figured out that you can't control your eating.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. Yeah, that's it. I said I'm eating so out of control, I don't even want to see it written down, right? And the thing that had kind of been sustaining me is that I was never writing down that I was eating on Sunday mornings a pound of bacon. But when you write down you ate a pound of bacon, you go, oh my God, I ate a pound of bacon. You can't do that, right? So you just don't write it down anymore. And that's generally the reason why people don't budget. They don't budget because they don't want to see where they're spending their money. But I submit to you that this is the most powerful tool you have. If you think about a budget as not a punishment or restriction, but as your prioritization. So if you put at the top of your budget that you want to spend 90% of your money eating out, God bless you. Do what you want to do with your money. But don't get to the end of the month and only have spent 60% of your money eating out and then say, well, I don't know why I can never spend 90% eating out. If you budget, you can prioritize and you can put your money where your priorities are. I'll talk to you some about what your priorities might want to be. You might consider them, but it's really so that you can make sure you're spending your money exactly how you want to spend it. And for many of you all, you're going to end up having businesses, right? I mean, engineers end up with businesses all the time. And you would never run your business without a budget. And the reason why you wouldn't run your business without a budget is because you know that you could not win in your business if you were not paying attention to what you were spending and what your costs were, right? But you could decide if you want a particular type of engineer, you could pay them more than others. That would be your choice, but you wouldn't want to do that willy-nilly. So all of us, no matter how little or how much money we have, should budget. I started budgeting back in 2005. And before every pay period, I do a budget. Now, of course, I've been doing a budget for 15, 20 years. So I have spreadsheets for which I can do a lot of cut and pasting, but I always know what I'm spending my money on, and then I can adjust. That's very different, okay, than having something like Quicken and spending all your money. And then after you spent it, go back and say, oh, I spent money on something, because that's not budgeting. That's just reporting. It's different. You want to make sure that before you spend $1, you know what you're going to spend your dollars on. That's all. However you want to do it, that's completely up to you, but a budget. So even college students should have a budget, all right? That's the first thing you want to do. Second thing is kind of simple. You got to spend less than you make. Once you write your budget and you think about your finances, if you have to spend more than you make, then that's how you're going to always have a credit card, or you're going to always be running somebody to borrow money, because you just can't make it on what you have if you're spending more than you make. So that's why being very honest with yourself in the beginning with your budget, how much do you bring in, right? And then how much can you spend? And that means you're going to have to prioritize, but you can't spend more than you make. Saving and investing. For some of us, we're in college, that might just be, putting away 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks a pay period, just in case something happens. As you make more money, you can think about investing, and we'll talk about the priorities on when should you invest versus when should you just be saving. And then give. I mean, all of us should give, right? Whatever it is, that might be your church, synagogue, mosque, it might be to Feeding America, whatever your priorities are, everybody should be giving something to somebody who's less fortunate than they are. If you kind of build that in, it's just a mental thing. I didn't make a slide for it, but Dave talks about, finances is like 80% of it might be math. Sorry, 80% of it is your feelings, 20% of it is math, right? And that's why they have all these things for us that make us feel a certain way, so we'll spend more. So for example, if you're spending with a credit card or even a debit card, you'll spend more, a lot of studies shown, than you would if you do with cash, right? So all the banks want us to have credit cards and debit cards because they know, right? Pretty much it's hard to find cash. As a matter of fact, thumbs up if you got some actual green cash in your pocket right now, put your thumbs up. Yep, that's pretty typical, right? Most of us don't carry cash anymore, right? All right. And then the last is Christina's got a little cash, so we know who to go see. Oh, Christina, you got your hand up too? You have a question? Just thumbs up. Okay. All right. And the last thing is to avoid all debt. Avoid all debt. If you can get yourself to a place where you don't have any debt, it changes everything. All right. And if you think about it, think about this question: what does it mean to be wealthy? If somebody makes $30,000 a year and they only have $15,000 of financial obligations versus somebody who makes $1 million a year and they got $1 million of obligation, who's actually wealthier, right? I mean, it's kind of a rhetorical question. So it's not about how much you make, it's about how much you have to spend. Did I hear somebody? No. Okay. All right. So if you can, and for most of us, just regular people, it's those things like credit cards and cars and homes, right? We're not really, regular people aren't going into debt to buy, big buildings in New York City or big businesses. We're generally going into personal debt, right? To buy sofas and TVs and cars and those types of things.
Oh, wait a minute now. Wait a minute. Here I am. I'm breaking in again. Dr. Stevens. Now,
yes, sir.
Let's say I got a perfect example. This is a real world example. I have a kid who's in college, undergraduate, and I bought him his first cell phone, and that was when he was in middle school. So he wanted a new, I guess he wanted the iPhone 13, like the brand new. This was over at Christmas break. So he paid for it, but he could not actually afford it. I told him I wasn't going to do it. So he put it on, what do you call it when you buy it over time? So he pays about $20 or $30 a month. So you would consider that debt.
I would consider, yeah.
So you would say, so how is he? I guess you're going to give us some techniques.
Yeah, and so you're right. So you could catch me on, hey, if AT&T says you can buy this phone from us and we'll charge you $35 a month. We won't charge you a penny in interest. You just pay an extra $35 a month. I'm always asking myself, okay, if AT&T was doing that just to make it so I could buy the phone and not have to pay interest. So it's like a zero sum game, right? They don't make any money, but they don't charge me anything on it and I get the new phone. Why would they do that? Like, what would be the reason why would they do that? Because I know that AT&T is not doing something that's of no benefit to them. Right. So if all I was doing was saying, I will buy a new phone, kind of like you and I, Dr. Moore, when my old phone literally falls to pieces, right? And then we showed up every 5 or 6 years and bought a new phone and said, I'm not going to give you $1,300. I give you $35 a month at no interest for the 12 months or 36 months or whatever it is. Then I'll keep my phone for another 5 years after that. That'd be fine. But the reason why they've set it up so you can pay $35 a month that's hidden in your phone bill is so that every 2 years, you'll get a new phone. So it's that part that's the emotional part that makes you feel like it's not costing me anything. And actually, I just heard that Apple is starting a program for which you don't purchase the device anymore. You, in essence, rent it forever. And they've slowly walked us to that, Dr. Moore, by saying that every 2 years, when they come out with a new iPhone, you could just sign up and pay $35 a month at no interest. Because what people didn't realize for the past 2 decades is that they've only been renting phones from Apple anyway. You keep it for 2 years, you send it back to them to get a discount, and then they hand you a new one. You've just been renting phones. You haven't been buying them. So they said, we'll just come clean. We'll just say, y'all don't want to buy the phones and keep them for 5 years anyway. So we'll give you a new phone. Every time we bring out a new phone, whenever we say it, we'll bring out a new phone. We'll keep charging you an additional $35 a month in perpetuity on your bill. So those are the kinds of things where you're right. If I was just going to do my same thing where I would normally just pay the $1,300 and take the phone and walk away and don't see them again for 5 years. But I said, I don't want to give you $1,300 now. I give you $35 a month. I do that for 3 years and keep the phone for 2 or 3 more years. That'd probably be cool. But it's hard to just do that. That's an excellent question. Dave talks about, and literally I've stolen this from Dave. So I'm going to attribute. 7 baby steps for financial peace. All right. The first one is to save $1,000 for an emergency. And I'd have to say, this comes with the caveat. This comes with saying you're not going to borrow any more money, because these 7 steps don't work if as soon as you start working the 7 steps, you're still borrowing money, because they're dependent upon you saying, this is my method to get rid of debt and set myself up so I'm financially secure without debt and without having to have credit cards, right? But if you keep borrowing, then it's not going to work. So no borrowing. You say, okay, I used to be able to rely on my credit card for an emergency. I was driving home today and I ran over something and all 4 of my tires went flat, right? What am I going to do? Under normal circumstances, if I didn't have any money, I would go to the shop and I had to buy the tires with the credit card or get some credit from the tire shop. But now I have $1,000 to cover that. Dave's research and my own personal research over the past 20 years or so is that we typically just don't have emergencies that are more than $1,000 if we define emergencies correctly. So it is not an emergency that your tires went bald and you need new tires, because anybody who drives a car knows that at some point you're going to have to replace the tires. And when you buy the tires, they typically tell you how long they're going to last you: 30,000 miles, 40,000 miles, 75,000 miles. So you should, in your budget, have some money that you put aside regularly to repair and replace tires, because they're not things that last forever. Emergency funds are not that you did not ever get an oil change, then you had engine problems and now you have an emergency. You have to have the 35 or 40 bucks to get your oil changed every 3,000 miles. So these are not normal things. These are emergencies. That's why I said 4 tires blew out today on the way home. That nobody's planning for all their tires to go out. So now you have to go and spend $600 on tires. Thank God you had $1,000 that you put on the side. And I'll say for your college students, so it might be $500 to $1,000, right? You know, but something so that if $100 or $200 happens, if your alternator goes out on your car, you don't have to borrow money because it was going to cost $250 to buy an alternator and have somebody replace it for you. That's the idea. So that's step one. Step two is snowballing your debt. And here's where it's kind of counterintuitive. What you do is you make a list of every penny you owe and who you owe it to. And sometimes that's some effort because it's hard to know all the time who you owe money to. And you list those things from smallest to largest. You don't care about the interest rates. You don't care about doing things like saying, hey, I'm going to get rid of the biggest one first. You go smallest to largest. This is because of the psychological impact of winning. So if you have a credit card that you have $200 on it, and you look at that and you say, wow, I could, if I don't borrow any more money on that credit card, I could pay that credit card off in a couple of months or 3 months or whatever it is. And you do that, you get this really great feeling of accomplishment, right? Because it happened in 2 or 3 months, as opposed to saying, I've got $30,000 in student loan. I'm going to grind away at this, at, you know, $200 a month. And then you got to wait 8, 9, 10 years before you get the feeling of I'm making some progress. Then as you pay off those smaller debts, whatever those minimum payments were, you roll it over into the next debt. So let's say I had the $200 credit card and I was paying, I haven't had a credit card in a while, maybe I'm paying $40 a month or something like that is my minimum payment. So I pay that off in a couple of months. And then I take that money that I was paying on that, right? So let's say I pay it off in, you know, $200. So I pay it off in 4 months. So I paid what, $50 a month. And I take that $50 plus the $20 that would have been a minimum payment, and I put that on the next credit card, which might be $700. And now I'm going to kill that one because that minimum payment might have been $50, but now I'm throwing $70 at it every month. And I do that one. I just keep doing that until I get down to the bottom. And my wife and I did that till we got down to the $45,000 in student loan debt. In the meantime, you're just paying the minimums on all the others because you don't want the repo man to come and get you, right? And when we got to the $45,000 in student loan debt, it went by really fast because I was able to throw $1,500 or $2,000 at it because I had paid off all the other stuff. So you do that, and that's how you get to a place where you can do things like not have a car loan or not have student loans. I thought my student loan, Lily, I did. You know, Dave Ramsey on his radio show, if anybody's ever listened, he talks about it being your friend that's in your closet because it stays with you forever because you pay, you know, the government makes you pay $300 a month and it's kind of, you pay that until you die. And so we got rid of the student loan debt and that freed up a lot of our money because that was something that was going to be around forever. And then once you can pay off cars and other things, you're in a really good spot. Once you've snowballed your debt. So the entire time that you're snowballing your debt, you're maintaining your $1,000 a month emergency fund, right? So if you had to buy tires, you stop your snowball and you make sure you get your emergency fund back to $1,000. Once you do that, then you go back to snowball. Once you got everything paid off on your snowball, and when I say everything paid off, everything, but you know, if some of y'all have a home, your home wouldn't be included in that. So it would be everything up to your cars. Then you want to save 3 to 6 months in expenses because you want to protect yourself from, you know, what happens if I lose my job or I want to change my job or a pandemic hits or any of those things that might come up. You want to kind of have a cushion. And the 3 to 6 months, for most of us, 3 months is pretty good because those of us who have, you know, the levels of education we're not in volatile jobs. In most cases. So 3 months would be good enough. But if you're in a position, maybe you're in a small engineering firm when you graduate or something like that, where things might change quickly, then you might want to have a little bit more so that you can feel protected. You don't need a lot more than that, but certainly if you personally felt like you needed to have a year of expenses covered, then save that, but you do that quick. By the way, you're doing this when you don't have any debt. Right? For you all, most of you all only have up to a car anyway. So now you don't have a car payment, you don't have anything. So you're just getting paid and you don't have anything to spend your money on anyway. So you put it in this fund so that you make sure you have 3 to 6 months. By the way, this is not an investment. This is in a bank account because this needs to be safe and secure in case you need it.
Okay. Dr. Stevens, let me ask you a couple of questions I see in the chat.
Oh, good.
I think you answered the first one. Do you start with the highest interest or with your priority? And I think you said no, start with the lowest debt that you have.
That's
first.
right. Lowest balance.
The lowest balance. Okay. And the other question she has here is, do you have to do all of this in order? These steps, are they in a particular order that you need to actually start with step one and so on?
Very good question. Yes. Now, it may be that personally you're already at a different step, right? So some of you might say, I've already got $1,000 in an account that I could now earmark as just an emergency fund. So I don't need to take any time to do that. And then you can go right to step two. Some of you all might say, I don't have any debt, right? I'm a college student. I don't have any debt. So I can go to that. And I would say, just as a caveat, I'm speaking to you all. And in the beginning, I said you're graduating soon, relatively speaking. So as a college student, of course, you're not trying to pay off your student loans while you're literally in a place where you're taking out student loans or you're trying to get to your job. So even if, let's say, you had student loan debt from your undergraduate career, you're fully funded as a graduate student, I would wait until you get your first job before I would start tackling, things like your student loans. I would cut those off of the snowball, if that's clear. Dr. Moore, you think that's clear, everyone?
I think that is clear. And I think there's one additional question. This gets to, you touched on it a little bit, but could you say more about the difference or why Dave recommends not focusing on interest? So personal loan versus a loan with no interest and just tackling the smallest thing first.
Yes. And that's really about the psychology behind getting a win. So what I would want you to do is if you embarked on this, journey of paying off all your debt, I want you to feel like you're paying some things off quickly. So if you pick things that have higher interest rates, for example, because you're technically, mathematically, you're saving some money by paying them off, it may take you too long to get a win and you might give up. If you do the snowball quickly, you really don't lose enough in interest to even care about it because you're getting to a place where you're able to pay off your debt. So that's really the only reason. If you were a computer, then you would probably pick things that were going to give you any kind of savings. But as human beings, we need that feeling of getting wins, successes.
That's a good point. The 3 to 6 months of expenses that are, I guess you're saying they're there for something more catastrophic has happened. You lost your job or something. Maybe you got injured. You couldn't work for a bit.
Right.
What kind of things should be included in those 3 to 6 months? So what about, for example, my gym membership, my cable bill, these kinds of things? What are you thinking?
That's a very good point. 3 to 6 months, the $1,000 in step one and the 3 to 6 months in step three are for emergencies. So Dr. Moore, you hit it. It would be if FAMU told me tomorrow that I got my last paycheck last Friday, they're going to have to let me go. What would my priorities be until I found another job? They would be food, shelter, utilities, right? And under those kinds of circumstances, I'm probably calling the cable company and saying, you can keep it on if you want to, but I'm not paying it until I get into a better situation, right? This is for dire emergencies. And I'm glad you asked that because the 3 to 6 months would be the first place where we as normal people would start to see a significant sum of money amassed in a place that we could put our hands on it, which means that our tendency might be to start calling a whole bunch of things emergencies that aren't. So my prayer for all of you is that you never have to spend the money from your $1,000 and you never have to spend the money from your 3 to 6 months, because if you do, something really bad has happened to you. That's the way we want to think about it. But there would typically still not be anything more than about $1,000 emergency that you couldn't cover if you're still working, right? So, if the refrigerator goes out, you might have been noticing that you had an older refrigerator. Maybe you were sopping a little money away for the new refrigerator, but even if not, you go get yourself a refrigerator for $1,000 out of your $1,000 emergency fund. And then you put $1,000, stop everything, put $1,000 back in there, and then get back on track wherever you were in the 7 steps. Yeah. So now that you have your 3 to 6 months of emergency fund, you would be in a position to start investing. And the goal is to invest 15% towards your retirement, okay? And the idea for you all is, again, you're going to get a ridiculous bump in income once you graduate. So if you start taking 15%, if you get a salary for $100,000, you say, I'm going to take $15,000. You go to HR and you say, how do I get $15,000 in at the end of the year by doing it so much every month? And you do that from the beginning. You never live using that $15,000, then have to take it back. It's different for Dr. Moore and me, because when we saw this, we were thinking, oh, we were already living a certain way, and now we've got to find additional money to get into our retirement to try to get to this number. But for people who have never gotten any money before, you just start with this, right? And that's how you end up with 30 years of easy savings that get you to $2, $3, $4, $5 million, right? So you do it from the very beginning. You go to HR, when you sign up for your big job, you say, who do I have to go see so I can get 15%? And then our retirements, because we don't pick stocks, mutual funds, right? Something that is going to be steady, but you're not sitting around having to figure out what's up, what's down. And then you do basic monitoring and all those other things. You'll figure that out as you move along. But I want you to be thinking about investing in your retirement accounts from the very beginning. Don't say, I'll do that later. You can go online. We're all engineers and scientists. You can go to a financial calculator and you can see the differences between if you started investing at 25 or 30 versus if you start investing at 45 or 50, right? It just completely changes your retirement outlook. Most of you all probably don't have any children, right? And you're in graduate school, so last thing you're thinking about is college funding. But at this point, you could think about children's college funding. And just as you're looking at the 7 steps, notice where it falls. And the interesting thing, and I know some of y'all may have parents who are involved in your sustenance right now, but the interesting thing that Dave says is that I'm not going to eat dog food, so you can go to college fill in the blank. So the kids' college funding comes last. What you should do is what I know Dr. Moore did for his children, because they're very high achievers, and I did for my children, is I convinced them that college funding was on them. And the number one way, as many of you all know, I'm sure most of you all, because you're in graduate school in engineering, is that you work hard in high school and you get scholarships, right? And if you get scholarships and you pick the right school, you can pretty much pay for your own college funding. And I'm certain that there are people on the call who have, for all intents and purposes, made it through school for free just because of your academic achievements, right? And so that's why you put that at the end, college funding at the end. If you don't have children, you shouldn't be college funding, right? So if you're 35, 40 years old, you're not married, you have no children, I wouldn't college fund. I start college funding when I have some children, right? Step 6 is to pay off your home. I have just a few minutes and I'm going to finish up. I'm almost done. I will just speak on this a little bit. You all should never have a mortgage. If you don't hear anything from me except that, if you do these things, you will never have a mortgage. Again, if I triple your income, I take you from your $30,000 a year with 5 roommates, and I pay you $100,000 a year when you graduate. If you could save $20,000 or $30,000 a year, which would be relatively easy because I would double your salary and you could still save $30,000 a year, you could purchase your first home. Your first home is not going to be mine, and it shouldn't be. I'm 56 years old. So you shouldn't get the same house I have, but you could buy yourself a condo or townhouse. It may not be the greatest, but you could buy that. And as you know, with real estate, you buy it, you live there for 5 years, you sell it, and you continue to do that. And eventually you will have enough equity in your home that by the time, for many of you that you have families and your families need larger homes, you will have the cash to purchase those homes, right? So you should be thinking about, how could I do this without ever having to borrow money? If you have to borrow money for a home, just so you know what people say, you should be in a position to put down 20%, and your mortgage shouldn't be more than a quarter of your monthly income, right? And that would be the somewhat allowable debt to carry. But for most of you all, you could think about never having a mortgage and you could pull that off. Boy, would your life be different if you never had a mortgage. Mortgages typically are the largest portion of people's income, right? Goes to paying for their shelter. And then, of course, when you're wealthy and you have nothing to pay, no debt, no bills, you can give. And you can literally give like a ridiculous person, right? You can pick the things that are important to you and you can change lives, all right? And so that's ultimately where you want to be. So the 7 steps again. Step 1, $1,000 emergency fund. Step 2, snowball that debt. Step 3, 3 to 6 months of income. Step 4, 15% retirement. Steps 5 and 6 are for when you get to be old, married, and have children, college funding, pay off your home. And then step 7, give a whole bunch of money to somebody who's less fortunate than you. If you do it right, it'll pay off, because it's paid off for some of us, and we didn't do it right for a long time. And we started doing it right somewhere long after the ages that many of you all are at. And so I thank you for the time, and I'm open for any questions you all might have. I'll stop sharing my screen, Dr. Moore.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. We have about 4 minutes or so, and I think I have a chat message so far, a chat question, I should say. You see it, Dr. Stevens? I was able to pay off my credit card debt in full. Then it came back again because I got into a car accident. Yes. What did I do wrong?
Christina, I wouldn't say you did anything wrong. And I do have to say this: if you embark on something like these steps and you kind of backtrack, then you just get back on track, right? So I don't know that you did anything wrong. Something bad happened to you and you had to make do. I wouldn't want you to think that if it all came crashing down and wasn't working out for Dr. Stevens, that I wouldn't do whatever I had to do to make sure that my family was taken care of. So you might look at me, you might say, Dr. Stevens, you told us don't get a credit card, but you got one. I mean, so if you had to go back and borrow against it again, just go back and pay it off again and try to stack that emergency fund, and hopefully nothing bad will happen to you. But I would not say you did anything wrong. See David's hand?
Yeah, so I have a question. So good talk, Dr. Stevens.
Thank you.
During the talk, you mentioned, you and your wife. And that's interesting because when you give this talk to us, we're doing this individually. So in the future, when you're looking to have like a partner, how do these steps play a role into when it's not just one person, it's 2 persons, and then there can be difference in incomes. Everyone comes in with their different depths. Everyone comes in with their different financial backgrounds, different perspectives. So how do you incorporate these steps, especially when you're looking forward to like having a partner and stuff like that?
Yes. And so, of course, my religious background will come into, how do you choose a partner, right? And so your partner has to be equally yoked. Your marriage probably not going to work if you come into your partnership saying that I don't want to have debt, and your potential spouse is saying, well, I'm borrowing as much money as I can, right? That's going to be a problem. Certainly, if you come together with someone with debt and they're amenable, then you all would then work the steps to get rid of their debt. And I do think that just for good partnerships, a guy who's been married for a few years, and I know Dr. Moore, is that these things usually work when the finances are melded together. And that's often hard, but then that too goes into who are you going to choose to be your partner, because you need to think of your personal home finances as one, as opposed to, I have mine, my wife has hers. So my wife and I, we take care of all of our finances together. We put all the money in one account, and we meet and discuss, what we're going to do with our money.
Thank you.
Yep. And then I see somebody put a message in here to me. Is it better to save for college fund on your own or use programs like Florida Prepaid? Excellent question. Saving on your own probably will be last after things like 529s and Florida Prepaid or state prepaids, because you all may go anywhere. Only because of that they amass more benefit, right? So a 529 is basically a mutual fund that you purchase from a state or an entity, and your children can then use that money in any state, right? Things like Florida Prepaid, I think Georgia has one, most states have one that you can pay into they're really, really good, provided your kids are going to go to school in that state, because usually you can get some of the money out to go somewhere else, but there, for lack of better terms, there's some penalties against that. But in both cases, those things probably do better than if you, for example, just tried to save it on your own or even invest on your own. There are tax implications. So there are some tax benefits to 529s and doing state prepaid programs.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, I don't see any other questions from all of our participants. So Dr. Stevens, I want to thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
For
Thank you so
everybody
much.
for what we learned and hopefully refreshed and all of that good stuff. So thanks, everyone. We appreciate it. And
Everyone
we'll see
have
you
a
next
great day.
time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.